Rancher. Lived alone for years until the Bigfoot returned. Something buried under his father's grave. He lived alone for 20 years, guarding his father's grave from time and memory. But one winter night, something came out of the woods, not to harm, but to return what was buried with the old man. A footprint too large for any man, a sound beneath the snow, and a creature who remembered his father when the world had forgotten. Not every legend is meant to scare. Some walk out of the mist to give a lonely rancher one last piece of peace. The mountain remembers what men forget. The wind swept down from the north carrying a skin-cutting chill. The whole Wyoming valley lay in a pale white haze like a memory. At the end of a dirt road, buried half a foot in snow, stood a small ranch called Ward Ranch, and a man who had lived there for 20 years without ever leaving. Caleb Ward, now past 40 tall and broad-shouldered, his hair streaked with gray. People said he hadn't smiled once since the day his father died in the winter storm of 1873. His father, William Ward, had been a hard rancher, the one who taught him how to shoot, how to herd cattle, and above all, how to keep a promise to the land. His grave rested on the hill behind the ranch, beside the bare black pines where the wind never ceased to blow. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the Absaroka Range, Caleb climbed the hill slowly, an oil lamp in hand. Beneath the thick snow, his father's gravestone lay white as if no one had ever come there. He knelt, brushed off the snow, and placed on it the old hat he had kept for 20 years. The wind whistled through his ears, carrying with it a strange sound, a knock as though someone were tapping beneath the ground. Caleb froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it made his heart race. Leaning closer, he pressed his hand against the snow, feeling a faint tremor below. Then a thin crack spread across the surface like a silver thread. As he stepped back, the moonlight revealed a footprint enormous, twice the size of a man's, pressed deep into the brittle ice. The wind rose, carrying with it a low groan from the distant woods. Caleb gripped the lantern tighter, its flame trembling across his weathered face. For an instant, the world seemed to fall silent, leaving only his heartbeat and that muffled knocking from deep within the earth. The old dog howled, once long and sharp, then fell quiet. Caleb looked around, snow stretched endlessly, and no one was there. Yet through the freezing gust, he heard a whisper, faint but clear like the voice of his father, lulling him to sleep long ago. "Pa," he called, hoarse with fear. No answer. Only the wind swept past, tilting the lamp and casting the shadow of him and the cross across the blotched snow. A feeling of loneliness and fear merged together, spreading like frostbite. Yet beneath that chill, something deeper stirred, an intuition that his father had never truly left this place, that the mountain itself, and perhaps something else in the forest beyond, were trying to tell him what men had long forgotten. Part 1. The Grave That Whispered Back. The following afternoon, the sun slid past the western ridge, leaving a long golden scar across the snow. The wind cut through the pines with a dry hiss like broken strings of a violin. Caleb pulled on his leather coat, gripped his shovel, and climbed the hill where his father's grave lay silent in the frozen white. The snow was as thick as ever, but the earth around the grave was soft, sunken, disturbed, like someone had dug it up and hastily covered it again. Caleb knelt, brushed away the snow, and his hand touched damp soil, something impossible in this frozen season. A faint metallic stench rose. His fingers closed on thick strands of coarse gray hair, stiff with what looked like dried blood. Frowning, he held them up to the weak light. Not cattle, not wolf, not bear. Under the dim sun, the hairs glimmered faintly like silver threads of wire. "No, it can't be," he whispered, but left the thought unfinished. He fixed the wooden fence around the grave, then walked slowly down the hill, the strange hairs clenched tightly in his fist. Inside the cabin, the oil lamp threw trembling patches of light against the wall. Caleb set the hairs on the table and examined them with his small magnifying glass. They were denser than any animal's fur, and under the flame, they reflected a bluish sheen like fish scales. His brows drew tight, his fingers trembling slightly. In the corner, the old dog scout lay still, ears twitching every time the wind whistled through the boards. He wasn't asleep, just listening. Caleb sighed, leaned back in his chair, a cold glass of whiskey in hand. Beyond the window, the sky had darkened to black, the moon, a pale coin adrift above the snow. That night the wind sounded different. Not the usual long howl, but broken groaning laced with a deep rumble far away like wood being dragged across stone. Scout rose suddenly, whining, low eyes fixed on the door. Caleb stood, snatched his rifle. "Easy boy," he muttered, though his voice shook. When he cracked the door open, the wind rushed in like a wild beast, snuffing the lamp in an instant. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the faint moonlight slipping through the crack. Scout growled, backing into the corner. Caleb tried to pull the door shut, but the wind seemed to grip his hand. Across the porch stretched a wet streak of mud trailing from the hill down to the steps. Under the moon it glistened black like blood. He bent down, fumbling for the lamp, but it refused to light. The draft carried with it a sound soft, fragile like a sigh. Caleb froze. A moment later, Scout howled long and sharp before cutting off into silence. Then he saw it something lying on the wooden step between two wet footprints. A silver chain, old, tarnished, yet catching the faint gleam of moonlight. Caleb knelt, hand trembling as he picked it up. On its pendant were the engraved letters, WW, the very initials he had carved himself for his father's last birthday. His chest clenched. It was his father's necklace, the one William Ward had worn all his life, lost with him in the storm 20 years ago. No body had ever been found. Neither had this necklace. And yet here it was, laid on his doorstep along a trail leading from his father's grave. Caleb staggered back, the moonlight bleaching his face pale. His lips trembled. "Pa, is that you?" No reply, only the wind passing the eaves, jangling the horse's chain. He sank onto the step, the necklace cold in his hand. The feeling grew. Someone was standing out there in the dark, watching him. For a moment, a cloud veiled the moon, and the cabin drowned in complete blackness. Silence pressed in until a single heavy footstep broke it. Just one. Then gone. Caleb lit the lamp again and rushed outside, but nothing. Only snow and wind. The lone trace, a trail of wet earth leading back up the hill, vanishing where his father's grave stood. He remained there a long while, breath turning white in the air. The chain was still in his grip, its worn letters, WW, catching the lamplight. Caleb raised his eyes toward the snowy ridge. A thought crept into his mind, terrifying, impossible to smother. If his father truly rested in peace, then who had returned this keepsake? The wind roared louder, making the pines sing like the whispers of old spirits. In the moonlight breaking through, Caleb glimpsed a shadow on the hillside, tall, massive, standing against the snow. He blinked, and it was gone. Only silence remained, and the cold necklace burning in his palm, an artifact from the past, carrying a question no man dared to ask. Something had returned from the grave, carrying with it the memory of William Ward. Part 2. The shadow that stood watching. 3 nights had passed since Caleb found the silver chain. Since then, he hadn't slept. Each time his eyes closed, he heard again that faint knocking from the earth and saw the wet trail of mud stretching to his porch. Snow fell heavier now. In the days that followed, the cold was so sharp that the cabin's smoke froze in midair, hanging like mist. Caleb kept to his chores, splitting wood, feeding the horses, mending the fence, but his eyes never left the hill. There, beneath the snowdrift, the tree shadows stretched long black fingers, clawing into the earth. On the 3rd night, the wind shifted. Wolves howled from afar, then cut off an eerie silence for this country. Scout lay pressed against the door, fur-bristling eyes burning yellow in the firelight. Caleb was loading cartridges into the Winchester when the lamp flickered, dimmed like a breath had blown across it. A shadow slipped past the window. Not a man. Couldn't be a man. It nearly touched the framed shoulders as broad as a barn door. Scout growled a guttural snarl unlike any sound before. Caleb moved slowly toward the door, rifle in hand. He pushed it open and the wind roared in with a skin-splitting cold. On the hillside stood a massive figure. Amid the blinding snow, it loomed motionless. Moonlight glared off the ground, tracing a pale outline around its shape, a great head-thick shoulders, the whole body draped in dark gray fur. It did not move. It only watched. Caleb froze. His muscles locked, his heartbeat throbbed against the wind. Fear gripped him, yet his gaze would not break away. In his mind came an old memory. At 18, he had heard his father speak of the keeper of the woods, a wanderer of the mountains, guarding the places where the dead lay. His father had said, "If you ever see him, son, don't shoot." He remembers. Caleb bit his lip. He remembers. The words echoed with every beat of his heart. He lifted the lamp, its glow piercing the snow. The shadow did not stir. Then suddenly it stepped forward once. Snow sank beneath its weight with a deep, dull sound. Caleb raised his rifle, the barrel quivering. "Stay right there," he barked, voice ragged in the storm. But the creature did not advance. Instead, it lowered one immense hand, fur-streaked silver wet with snow, and laid something on the ground wrapped in old hide. Then it stepped back, turned half its body, and cast a glance toward the hill where William Ward lay buried. And within seconds, the figure melted into the fog. No sound, no trace. Only the whirling snow remained. Caleb lowered the rifle and approached the bundle. The hide was thick, bound with rope. Carefully, he unwrapped it. Inside was a half-burnt map. The upper part bore the outline of the Absaroka Range. The lower half was charred, leaving only a faded scrawl, W. Ward. Last camp, January 1873. Caleb's chest tightened. That was the year his father vanished. He looked around, the mist closed in the wind alone for company. "Why show me this?" he whispered, "unless it wants me to know." Scout circled, growling low. At the edge of the woods, a footprint pressed deep into the snow, nearly twice the span of Caleb's hand. He set his palm inside it and fell silent. That night in the cabin, he spread the map on the table, laying the silver chain beside it. The lamplight danced across the charred words. Something new stirred within him. Not fear, but a reverence laced with awe. He remembered the creature's eyes, not savage, not hostile, but old, tired, and burdened with memory. Caleb sipped his whiskey, eyes fixed on the map. At the bottom of the glass, the liquor shimmered with the reflection of the rifle hanging on the wall, the only thing that still bore the touch of his father. He thought, if that beast truly lives, and if it knew my father, why appear now? The wind slammed the window. Scout howled long. Caleb turned, and through the frosted glass, a shadow stood in the storm exactly where it had before. But this time, it did not vanish into the woods. It stood watching, the cabin eyes glinting in the dark, not with malice, but with a stillness, as if keeping vigil. Caleb snuffed the lamp. The cabin sank into night, leaving only a sliver of cold moonlight through the boards. In the silence, he heard a breath, slow, steady, not his own. The breathing lingered, then stopped. 1 minute, 2. Then came a soft sound at the door. He grabbed the lamp, cracked it open. There, pressed into the snow on the step, was a massive handprint, 3 fingers clear as day. Beside it, a torn leather strap, the same kind once used to bind the map. Nothing else. Caleb collapsed to his knees, hand trembling. No man alive could leave a print, that deep a hand, that large. Yet he knew one truth: this creature had not come to kill. It was leading him. He stared toward the woods. The wind stilled as though silenced by command. From afar, moonlight pierced the pines, shining down upon his father's grave, illuminating the soil that had been disturbed. At dawn, when the snow finally ceased, Caleb climbed the hill once more. The marks from the night before remained, the brown streak of earth circling the grave, stopping at the wooden cross. He knelt, pressing his hand to the ground. There, beneath something hard and cold, he dug it free, a bent shard of metal, the remains of an old rifle stock. The name W. Ward was still carved into it. Caleb's hand tightened, tears welling. Now he understood. The creature was not here to frighten him. It was returning the pieces of his father. The shadow didn't come to harm. It came to remind. Part 3. What the Beast Returned. On the 4th night, the fog was so thick the sky itself seemed gone. The moon was strangled in the clouds, leaving only a faint glow across the snow. Caleb Ward pitched a small tent beside his father's grave, clutching the oil lamp, its smoke rising like breath. The wind sifted through the pines, humming in long, low tones like an ancient song the mountain folk still whispered about. Scout lay close, his head on Caleb's leg ears, twitching at every shift of the silence. The forest held no birds, no wolves, not even the sigh of wind, only the beat of a man's heart and the crackle of fire. Caleb leaned against the gravestone, staring into the dense white mist. He no longer knew what he hoped for: truth, a warning, or simply an end to these long, haunted nights. Before him, his father's silver chain hung faintly glimmering on the wooden cross. In his coat pocket rested the charred scrap of map and the rusted rifle stock he had unearthed. "Pa," he whispered, voice breaking in the frost. "If you're still out there, show me what I'm meant to see." Around midnight, the ground began to tremble. Not a violent quake, but steady, heavy pulses like footsteps from something immense. Scout growled, low lips peeled back, eyes fixed on the tree line. Caleb rose, rifle in hand, lamp turned toward the sound. Its flame danced across the fog. And then a shadow emerged. A colossal shape, striding slow. No roar, no charge, only step after step, snow crunching deep beneath its weight. Caleb's heart thundered. When it halted barely 20 paces away, he saw it clearly through the mist. A figure twice the size of a man, shoulders broad, fur matted and wet, each breath a cloud of steam. Its hands were like shovels, chest heaving, but its eyes, not feral, not aflame. They were weary, heavy, sad. For a moment, their gazes locked, man and legend, across the cold silence. Caleb raised the rifle, but his hand trembled so hard the stock clicked. "I don't want trouble," he rasped, "but if you come any closer." The creature did not advance. Instead, it reached behind its back, pulled out something wrapped in brown hide. Slowly it bent and set the bundle down on the snow, gentle as though fragile. Then it stepped back, eyes never leaving him. No words, no sound. Only the gesture, solemn, deliberate ritual. Caleb waited a long breath, then lowered the rifle. He stepped forward cautiously, mist biting his skin. The hide was soaked and streaked with mud. He opened it. Inside lay an old revolver, metal worn but still engraved, W. Ward, his father's gun, the one buried with him 20 years ago. Caleb's throat closed. His hands shook as he lifted it, droplets of mud falling from the steel. He looked up at the beast, lips barely moving. "You dug it out." The creature tilted its massive head. Its shoulders sagged with age. Then it lowered its head slightly in a gesture almost human. Then it turned, retreating into the fog. No roar, no flight, just gone as if it had never been. Caleb stood frozen in the snow. The first wind in hours brushed past, carrying pine resin and damp earth. His lantern flickered, then died. He looked at the revolver in his hands, mud dripping onto his boots. On the stock beneath W. Ward, a second line was scratched crude as if by claw. "The woods remember." His breath came hard, steaming white. His whole body trembled, not from the cold, but from the truth revealed. He knelt at the grave, clutching the gun. "Pa." His voice cracked, barely more than breath. He brought it back. The wind stirred, rattling the silver chain on the cross. The moon broke free of the clouds at last, casting its light across the grave, gleaming on the letters WW and the woods remember. And in that light, Caleb saw a shape among the pines, not the towering shadow, but the outline of a man in a tall hat and long coat walking away. The figure paused, tilted its head in a quiet farewell, then vanished into the mist. Caleb bowed his face to the ground, tears mixing with the snow. He understood then Bigfoot had not dug the grave to steal, but to return what men had lost. Perhaps on the night his father died, the creature had been there. Perhaps it was the only witness, and for 20 years it had kept vigil, keeping the promise a son could not. The wind fell still. The forest hushed. Only the heartbeat remained and the drip of melting snow from the pines. Caleb gripped the revolver, set it back upon the grave, and whispered, "You kept your promise, Pa." And so did he. Scout lay quietly at his side, resting his head on his master's leg, eyes glimmering with something that seemed to understand. Far away, a low call rolled through the woods, not a threat, but mournful, like a farewell. Caleb lifted his gaze toward the forest where the shadow had vanished. He whispered, "Thank you for bringing him home." Snow began to fall again, soft, covering the tent, the grave, the giant footprints. The night grew so still one could hear the ashes cooling in the lantern. And in that silence, moonlight struck the revolver. The woods remember glowing once more before sinking back into shadow. The beast had not returned what it stole. It had returned what was forgotten. Not a weapon, but a message. Part 4. The story. The woods kept dawn came slower than any day before. The fog still hung thick gray as smoke. Caleb had scarcely slept. He sat before the gravecoat, dusted in snow eyes, darkened with weariness, yet strangely bright. Beside him, his father's revolver lay half-buried, its worn steel catching a faint glint in the pale morning light. The forest was silent, no bird song, no whisper of wind, only the stillness of something long kept and just awakened. Caleb drew a deep breath, clutching the silver chain in his hand. Then he stood, gaze fixed on the distant mountains, the same range marked in red on the charred map. "All right, Pa," he murmured. "If that's where you rest, I'm going to see it for myself." He carried the revolver, a hunting knife, and the burned map. Scout trotted beside him, quiet, alert. Together they left the ranch, cutting through the bare pines. Snow fell light but steady, veiling their trail. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. The trees loomed like sentinels. At times, Caleb swore he heard the breath of the wind behind him, but when he turned, there was no one. 2 hours later, they reached a hollow where snow melted slower. Caleb recognized it at once, the place the map had marked. Once it had been a camp. Now only charred posts remained, ash buried in earth, and the ruins of a collapsed shelter. He knelt, brushed aside ice. A circle of stones marked an old fire pit, still black with soot. In the ashes, he found a shard of bone, human, unmistakable. Caleb swallowed hard and dug deeper. He uncovered a piece of rotted hide, then a tarnished brass button etched with WW. His breath steamed as he stared. Here lay what remained of the father, lost to storm and legend. Then the wind changed. No longer a whisper, heavier like breath. Scout growled, body rigid. Caleb lifted his head. Through the mist, a towering shape emerged, Bigfoot. It did not advance, only stood 30 paces away, watching. Moonlight and fog clung to its fur, steam rising off its frame like smoke. Caleb rose to his feet. He did not raise the rifle. He only looked back. "You were here, weren't you?" His voice cracked. "You saw him die." The creature did not answer. It only tilted its head, the slightest nod. Then it lifted one great hand, pointing toward the fallen shelter. Caleb followed the gesture. When he looked back, the figure was gone. He approached the ruin. Beneath the snow lay a deep hollow like a grave. His pulse quickened. He dug and unearthed a body, bones wrapped in animal hide. Resting on the chest was a silver medallion engraved WW. Caleb crumpled, tears stinging. The truth locked into place. His father had fallen in the storm, lost to the woods. And Bigfoot, the creature of fear, had buried him with the rites of the forest. It had not only guarded the secret for 20 years, it had kept vigil, protecting, and at last returned the tokens so his son would know the man had truly rested. The wind swept through the trees, low and resonant like a distant choir. Caleb lifted his face, eyes red, voice shaking. "You did what I couldn't. You kept him safe." He pressed his hands together, bowed his head. "Thank you." From the depths of the forest, a deep cry rolled back. Not threat, but answer. Scout barked once, then fell silent. In that moment, Caleb felt his father's presence, not in form nor voice, but in the quiet weight of wind snow and the creature who had held a promise in silence for 2 decades. By the time he returned to the hill, evening had come. Caleb knelt at the grave, setting the chain and charred map upon the stone. He spoke softly, recounting it all, as if afraid to disturb the peace around him. The last light of day bathed the marker, casting a warm glow across his face, no longer the mask of a lonely man, but of one who had been answered. A breeze stirred. From the far woods the shadow appeared once more. Bigfoot stood at a distance, framed by fading light. Their eyes met. No fear, no doubt, only understanding, two guardians bound by the same vow. Caleb placed a hand over his chest and bowed. The creature bowed in return. Then it turned, striding back into the forest, swallowed by mist, gone forever. That night, Caleb sat on the cabin porch, watching the hill. The lantern hanging at the door burned all through the night, gold light spilling across the snow. He whispered, warmer than he had in years, "Some legends don't haunt, they heal." Scout lifted his head, ears pricking. From afar the wind rose, carrying a sound like the strum of a distant guitar, mingling with the breath of the mountains. And in the faint light, Caleb saw it, a fresh footprint pressed in the snow at the porch, not leading toward him, but away back into the woods. The truth did not lie in the grave, but in the forest kept by the one who still remembered when men had long forgotten. Part 5. The light on the hill. The snow had stopped the night before. The sky was brighter than usual, carrying the pale blue light of a fading winter. The wind was gentle now, no longer the cold howl of nights past, only the soft breath of a mountain, weary but at peace. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, his eyes darkened with sleeplessness, yet calm. Before him the valley lay still, a painting, half asleep. In the distance, cattle drifted back toward the barn, and Scout stretched lazily in the weak sunlight, content, as though his duty were done. Caleb looked to the hill where his father rested. Snow had already covered the footprints of the night before. No mud, no shadow, only the morning light glinting off the grave, making the thin layer of ice shine like a mirror set against the sky. He walked slowly up the hill, his father's revolver in hand, cleaned, oiled, and wrapped in new hide. At the grave, he knelt, burying the weapon beneath the wooden cross beside where the silver chain once lay. His calloused hands trembled slightly in the wind. As he pressed down the last handful of earth, he whispered, "You kept him safe, Pa, and now he's back home." Then he smiled, the first smile since the day snow had claimed the hill. The weak sunlight caught his face, tracing every crease of age and solitude. Yet in his gaze there was no shadow of fear, only gratitude. He raised the cross again and hung the silver medallion upon it. The chains swayed in the breeze, scattering light into his tear-bright eyes. From afar the wind moved through the pines, low and warm like the hush of voices speaking softly. Caleb narrowed his eyes, listening. "Some legends don't haunt," he whispered. "They heal." By evening, the snow blushed faint pink. Caleb returned to the cabin, stopping once more to look back at the hill. He pulled from his pocket the old lantern, wiped the soot from its glass, and lit it. The small flame flickered, glowing warm against the white. He hung it on the porch facing the woods. From a distance, the hill was only a shadow, but the lantern shone a beacon in the sea of snow. Night fell. The forest remained hushed. Caleb sat on the porch, a heavy blanket draped over him, Scout curled at his feet. In his hands lay his father's old journal, found among the ashes of the ruined camp. The pages were mostly gone, but the final lines, scrawled and shaky, could still be read. "If I don't make it out, maybe someone will. If the woods take me, I hope they remember me kindly." Caleb closed the book eyes on the lantern flame. The wind stirred it, making the light dance like breath. Far off, a shape moved among the trees. Not fast, not clear, just a ripple in the mist. But Caleb knew. He didn't need to see. Because in that instant he felt it, a presence watching, not a threat, but a friend. His voice was low, steady, respectful. "You're welcome to stay, old friend." Snow began to fall again as the night deepened. Yet the lantern never went out. It burned through the darkness, its warm glow stretching across the snow, shining all the way to the forest's edge. And in that glow the shadow appeared one last time, Bigfoot standing atop the hill, silent as stone, watching the cabin. A soft breeze passed. The creature bowed its head, then turned and walked back into the mist, gone without a trace. Caleb smiled. He lifted his hat, bowed in return. Scout barked once short and sharp, then fell quiet as though knowing the farewell was complete. The night sky opened, the moon high and clear. Stars scattered across the snow, twinkling beside the lantern light, two flames side by side, one from heaven, one from earth. Caleb looked up, his eyes glistening in the moonlight. He whispered, almost breath, "Not every shadow brings fear. Some just come to light the way." At dawn, travelers passing the valley, nomads, hunters, trappers, spoke of a golden light they had seen on the hill, burning through the night like an eternal flame. They swore they had glimpsed two figures in the glow, one small, one towering, before they vanished into the mist. No one could prove it, but from that day, none dared disturb the land again. They only spoke of it in hushed tones, calling it by a new name, the Hill of the Keeper. He buried the gun, but the light remained. And some say on quiet winter nights, it still burns for those who remember. The mountain remembers. More than 3 months later, the snow began to thaw. The small creek behind Ward Ranch ran again, carrying the damp scent of earth and pine. Herds of deer returned to the meadows, and the Wyoming Valley found its old rhythm once more. Caleb still lived there alone as he had for 20 years, but something in him had changed. No longer the man who only spoke to the wind, who gripped a rifle with shaking hands and saw life through a veil of snow. Now he spoke to the trees, to the soil, and to things unseen but always felt. Each night before sleep, he lit a small lantern on the porch, facing the hill where his father rested, where the shadow of the giant had once kept vigil. The lantern still burned. Not for anyone to see, but as a reminder to himself that some things should never be forgotten. The locals began to share strange tales, that on the northern hill during heavy snow nights, a golden glow could still be seen shining from a place where no one lived anymore, that sometimes people found enormous footprints beside the old marks of boots, as though man and beast still walked the graveyard patrol together. Some dismissed it as myth. Others simply smiled and said, maybe some promises don't die. Maybe some memories never fade. One morning, travelers passed the ranch. The cabin door was ajar, the lantern still burning, and on the table lay a handwritten note. The woods remember. Not everything that walks alone is lost. C. Ward Caleb was gone, no one knew where. All they found was a single giant footprint in the snow pressed beside his old boot mark. Both trails led toward the forest and ended where the mist grew thickest. From that day on, no one saw Caleb Ward again, but hunters out at night swore they heard faint knocking beneath the earth, followed by the wind through the pines like voices speaking low. The mountain remembers. Maybe legends don't need to be proven. Maybe they just need to be remembered. Because sometimes, what you call a monster is just someone who kept their promise. If you believe this forest still keeps the memory of old spirits, leave A in the comments, so the fire never dies. And don't forget, follow the channel to explore more strange stories the wild still keeps hidden.